Welcome to Three, a show about Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. I'm Gil Gross, host of Monday Match Analysis with outstanding tennis journalist Joel Drucker and Amy Lundy. And we're going to get into a major theme on today's show, which is motivation. And we'll start with a really surprising result that occurred in Vienna in the quarterfinal. Lorenzo Sonego defeats Novak Djokovic, surrendering only 3 games. It was the worst loss of Novak's career in a 3-setter, only matched by Marat Safin, who beat him in the Australian Open in 2005, also only surrendering 3 games. Amy, what the heck happened here?
It was also, Gil, the first time in his career that Novak has lost to a lucky loser.
Mm.
So after the match, Novak had some interviews with the media and he said, I came here to clinch the number one. I won a couple of matches. I did my job. And then that was it. That was really all I needed. So he did not say I threw the match or I didn't try. He could be fined for something like that. But he walked right up to that line and said, basically that he wasn't expending a lot of effort or he wasn't going to worry too much about the loss.
Joel, you said that Sampras did a similar thing when he broke the very record that
In
Novak was contending
1998,
for.
Pete Sampras clinched, finishing the year number one for the 6th straight time. And this was at the season-ending Masters event. And then he lost a 3-setter to Alex Pereira. I mean, look, the emotional aspects of having clinched the year-end number one, similar to a baseball team, let's say clinching a division or a pennant, can naturally lead to some emotional things. I mean, the match, Sampras lost in 3 sets in that match. Novak lost pretty badly. That happens to people. I mean, you could see there'd be some emotional aspects. Sonego is a good player. And again, I guess my thing with Novak, I'm curious about the effect of having had COVID and how his body feels. I mean, it must be, and this is someone who is carefully measured and how that affects him and where he is at physically and how he feels. And so there he did. He came to Vienna probably hoping to get enough points to clinch number one, and he did.
He seems to be a really goal-oriented person. And I kind of connect to that. I think I'm the same way. I put a goal in front of me. I remember my freshman year of high school, I actually asked my coach, what should my goals be? And because I just wanted to know, like, what am I shooting here for? I want that. I crave that. And when I graduated as a senior and the coach made a speech about all the seniors who are leaving, he actually brought that up. And it happened 4 years ago. And he said, you came up to me as a freshman and asked me, what should my goals be? And I'm like, who is this kid? And why is he like this? So that was the story that was told about me. I think Novak's similar.
I'm glad I didn't ask that of my high school coach. But it's interesting about things like goals and visions. I mean, and I think maybe that also Novak, you look at him, he's the insurgent in our 3. It was first Rafa and Roger ruled the world, so they were kind of like the big kids. They were like the older brothers, and then along came Novak. And so in a way, the course had been laid out. It's kind of like you could do all this research on birth order, and here he is. And so, okay, this is what some of the markers are, even though they've already been established before. But look, these guys are setting the bar. And also in a competitive thing, this is how well I have to play to be with them and to beat them. So I could see what make Novak that way. And there's something very, very focused and businesslike about him. And it's quite admirable. I mean, you see the steps he took with his diet and his fitness and all of these things. Very, very organized and methodical.
It's funny, when I was watching the replay of the match last night, I was thinking, did he eat gluten? Because that's the way he looked. It was like, it was the same Novak that you always see, his same style of play. It was just, he was a half a step behind where he normally is. If he normally stretches out this far, he was half a step closer to the center mark. It's like he wasn't quite getting there. He was also playing extremely quickly on his service games. I mean, he's a pretty he usually serves at a pretty good clip anyway and doesn't take a ton of time unless he's in one of his ball bouncing modes. But even for him, I started counting like 1,000, 1,000. It was like 7 seconds between some of his serves. And it was very clear that he did not want to be there. Now,
Yep.
I will say, though, Gil, that even though it hasn't been a physically taxing year, it's been mentally exhausting for him.
Well,
That's fair. And
he did have COVID, so there's a physical, not the physical exhaustion of tennis, but again, this this virus, whatever we want to call it, this virus that none of us really knows what toll it takes. Even on probably the most, it's hard to think of someone who's more fit on the planet than Novak Djokovic, but I wonder about that.
well, on the emotional note, there was a death that's somewhat close to him. The last name is Radovic. He's a prominent figure within the Serbian Orthodox Church, and Novak did reference this person who had died shortly before the match, and Novak had heard of it about it. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. This wasn't overly publicized, but I did get a few comments about it, and I did verify it. So I do think that it seemed like his head was somewhere else, and there may have been not one, not two, but maybe three reasons for that. Right.
The other thing is that as the podcast goes on, you guys will pick up that this is a huge theme for me. I don't think we should be playing tennis right now, professional tennis. It's just, now I understand this year with COVID, the calendar got all wonky and you had to squeeze some tournaments in that you wouldn't normally, but I think the sport needs to shut it down shortly after the US Open, maybe a few weeks, and then you do the tour finals, and then that should be it. And before everybody crowds my inbox in the comments section with hate mail,
I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with this take, but go on.
No, a lot of people do. They're like, you must not like tennis because you don't want tennis 24/7, 365. But actually, I believe that, and I have like a television background, so I understand the sort of waves of what the public likes and how the rhythms of how they like to, consume the sports products. I think that all sports need a rest. They need a sleep period to reflect on the previous year and build excitement. That's the key. You want to build anticipation. You want to just, oh, I can't wait to see tennis again, so you need that sleep period. And I think the players also need a chance to just reset. And I'm not talking about 3 weeks in December. I mean, 3 months is really what they need.
So you're talking about the calendar reform, and this is independent of COVID. You're opining that, let's say, from September 15th on, though I find that I get it. And as an American, I get that, but I play this around in my head too. And then I look at how would I put it, the decentralized nature of tennis, and I look at the marketplace, and I look at the fans in China, in Europe, in parts of the world that enjoy attending tennis tournaments, and the promoters enjoy putting on, and the players. I wrote this a few years ago where I thought it, for the very top players, the season might be too long because they got plenty of match play by the US Open. They've had plenty. But for the players who are lower ranked, it's not long enough. They can't get enough weeks because they need those plate appearances to generate their ranking points. So,
and also, Joel, I want to make clear, like, when you talk about calendar reform in the sport of tennis, that doesn't mean I think you should just chop off the Asian swing. I think the entire calendar, top to bottom, should be regionalized. And so you're not crisscrossing the globe constantly. And that the tournaments that are having trouble surviving shouldn't, I'm sorry, but they should not survive. I don't think we should force these events into the calendar if, they're being propped up any which way they can. And so I think that the calendar needs to be trimmed, reorganized, regionalized, and certainly there should be an Asian swing. Certainly, but maybe it should be in conjunction with the Australian Open, for example, because that part of the world is close. It's just that's my opinion. And to see Novak play that match, my heart kind of went out to him. I was like, I don't even think the guys should be playing right now.
I totally agree with the notion that the big problem with this time of year is there's nothing that we're building up to. And I know, Joel, we debate what is the tour finals, or what used to be the Masters Cup, and what does it really mean? But look, it doesn't feel like a major, that's for sure. It doesn't have that build up. So it's not that I think the season is too long, but I agree with you that this post major season is a time of year where tennis is not at full capacity. It's not all there. And I think we saw that yesterday. I mean, it's again, the main theme of our show, motivation. I find that motivation is sometimes all over the place, as is health at this time of year, health of the body. And that's why we get wacky results. We get Jack Sock has won Paris. Karen Khachanov won Paris. And no disrespect, take nothing away from them, but we don't see these kind of erratic results at Indian Wells. And well, Indian Wells maybe isn't even the best example because that doesn't lead up to a major, but we don't see wacky results at Rome. We don't see wacky results at Cincinnati so much, right? And can that be attributed to motivation?
Then the building up towards these, right, towards these 4 tent poles. I mean, that's kind of what the tennis year is. And so it's an interesting question, but again, it's kind of gets to the whole way the marketplace of the sport exists. I mean, I think from a narrative point of view, you're right. I mean, for example, I will not look back on the history of tennis and reward or penalize a player for any outcomes that were generated after the US Open. Again, we're never going to look back at, well, he never won Vienna. He never won and that's kind of the nature of these events that's tricky. It's like, you're right. It's like, well, an ex-pro I know said, yeah, that time of year, he called it the point safari. You're getting ranking points and things are happening. And some of the top players aren't in their best form. They're a little tired. They're withdrawing from events. And so that gives other players a chance to get points. And yeah, wacky things happen that don't seem in the norm. And I don't know. I mean, the answer is that's a real crunchy tennis calendar question. I mean, and what I've noticed when I talk to people, present company excluded, they're all looking to make reform not at their expense, though. Like, I remember someone who ran a tournament one part of the year. He was all for a Davis Cup happening in 1 week at another time of the year. And I thought, that's right. There's no skin off your tournament's nose. I see. But it's just, so that's a challenge in tennis. Everyone thinks, yeah, they want that thing fixed, but not their deal. So things like the Asian thing, like and then in this COVID and post-COVID world, the economics and the social nature of things. I mean, where are people going to want to travel and how are they going to feel safe? That, I hope there are folks in tennis really giving that some deep, deep thought.
Well, I think that the Players Association, this is where that comes in. And we can argue until the cows come home about whether the ATP really is a Players Association as it started, or whether it's become a tour, which is like a league analogous to the NBA or something like that. We can argue that till the cows come home.
It's a partnership. It's a partnership between both of them. Right. That's
right. But the players, they aren't organized the way a traditional union would be. So for them to be able to have a voice in redoing the calendar or any of this stuff, I feel personally, I'm with Novak. I do feel that they need to organize this and have a voice. And like you mentioned before, the lower level players and all that. So I'm on Novak's side tremendously, and I hope that the Players Association works out, although I haven't heard much on it lately.
I haven't heard a peep from it since the U.S. Open.
I have an update.
Go ahead,
They
Gil.
are, according to Brett McCormick of the Sports Business Journal, who I spoke to on Monday Match Analysis, they have a meeting scheduled after the season. So we're probably not going to hear anything until Andrea, I'm forgetting his last name,
Gudenzi
meets with the Players Association, and then, once they come together, hopefully we'll see what comes of that, and we'll get answers. But yeah, it's basically dormant until the season ends, is what it seems like.
That's fascinating. They put out their statements and then have gone into this kind of like quiet period, and I await to see what they wish to do and how they wish to lead. I wrote my tennis.com colleague Steve Tigner and I wrote something about it a little while ago about Novak and what I hope for him for the rest of the year. And I look for him to continue to play a leadership role with that. I'm intrigued to see what it is.
Well, let's shift gears to Nadal. And that doesn't mean we'll shift gears away from motivation, as that is still very relevant with what we're talking about. Why is Nadal playing Paris-Bercy? Do we have any theories?
Well, I have to credit the people in our comment section, because when we did our last podcast, we were talking about points and year in number one and things like that, and what does it all mean? And of course, I took the stance that in the grand scheme of things in the history of tennis, I don't think that questions of points and year in number one are anywhere in league with slams. So now the question of whether year in number one means something to the players individually, that's almost a separate question. But some people pointed out, so we were all asking, like, why is Nadal playing right now? Why is Nadal playing? Why is Nadal playing? If he's worried about COVID, which was supposedly the reason he didn't play the US Open, COVID is blowing up across Europe, especially in France. Why has he committed to these tournaments toward the end of the year in Europe? And some of the commenters in our comment section said, don't you understand? He's actually not trying to get the year in number one, which Novak has all but clinched, but he is actually trying to get 2 away from Dominic Thiem so that he will have the 2 seed at the Australian Open and will not have to be in Novak's side of the draw. Wow, that makes perfect sense, right, Gil?
Yeah, it does. However, I mean, look, it's not a foregone conclusion that it's all about that 2 seed. And it is very important to have a 2 seed versus a 3 seed in a major. But let's not dismiss the fact that maybe Nadal, who has not competed a lot over the course of this season, just wants to compete more.
I think I like that. I think that's true, that Nadal wants to compete more. He has a pretty good comfort level in the city of Paris when it comes to competing. I also think, I went round and round on this whole thing about the seeds, because when you texted it to us last week, Amy, I thought about it. I've interviewed a lot of great tennis players, and I've talked to them about some of these questions, like Rod Laver. I don't think Rod Laver ever cared when he was seeded, and when I would ask him about that, he said, well, you need to beat these people anyway. However, so I'm thinking, Nadal, I mean, I get the view of like, Nadal doesn't want to have to play Novak in the semis. He's Nadal. I think at one level, he doesn't care when he has to play Novak. However, he can say that, and he can say, I'm a champion. And I know these players can carry themselves as champions, and they will say that publicly. And I know this is the whole challenge of a topic that mostly revolves around action. And a lot of the saying, Pete Sampras used a great word once. He said, that's all commentary. So we don't actually know. Like, does Nadal, would he really prefer to play Novak in the finals? Or does he just want to win matches? So I don't know. I'd like to think that for a player, they don't care a champion doesn't care what they're seeded, because they're better than people anyway. But I don't know. And so maybe it's true. Maybe Nadal really does hunger for that number 2. And this just has to do with he would never say, oh, I don't want to be in Novak's half. He would never say that, but maybe He preferred to play for fun.
Let me
Go
interject with
ahead.
some breaking news. So the 2 seed is all but a foregone conclusion for Nadal. The number 2 ranking. His Dominic team is withdrawn from Paris with a blister on his foot. I just caught this. I did not have that info when we started here, but that broke about an hour ago. Meanwhile, team lost early-ish in Vienna, a tournament that he won last year, and he made the finals in London at the O2 Arena for the ATP finals a season ago. So if we're looking at everything, there's very few points that Dominic Thiem has the opportunity to pick up here.
What about the Paris Masters?
Well, he withdrew.
Oh, he withdrew. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
So it's looking like the 2 seed will happen for Nadal. Now that does not take away the fact that Nadal may have still played this tournament and entered in Paris-Bercy because he wanted to make sure his number 2 ranking was intact.
But the just to again, I'm not a points person, right?
Yep.
But the year and the tour finals, don't they give away tons of points at that thing?
Of course.
1,500.
So you're saying though that Nadal is pretty much. What if Dami won that thing?
Well, he was a finalist, so he'd
only get so much better. Remember, this is the whole quirkiness. Like in Nadal last year lost in the semis of Paris. Team lost in the 3rd round. So yeah, this whole thing about, I mean, there's motivation.
Rafa played the tour finals last year, though, right? As well.
Lost in the round robin. Yeah, he did.
Okay.
So he can exceed. He's hoping to do better. His Paris, he got to the semis. But this thing on motivation, I think motivation is kind of like multi-layered with these folks. And it's also kind of a thing, like I want to clarify the whole thing about year-end number 1. Of course, slams matter more, but in the view of history, I think it's a deeply significant way of evaluating a player's major resume of the year-end number 1. That's what the players say a lot of stuff. That's what I've come to see a lot in this game for all these years, is that they say things. And sometimes they're almost baited into saying things like, would you say finishing the year number 1 is important to you? What's the player going to say? No. You know, it's like, it's fun. It's like we've all been in these press conferences. You see the way, answers are fished and gathered. And Amy, you and I have been around enough of this stuff to sports to see how that can happen, right? You can fish for the quote you want. The players, no, number 1 doesn't matter to me. And there's all this, again, commentary and the motivation about rankings, and it's not even points. And sometimes it's just called winning matches. Just want to win matches.
Well, here's what Novak said after losing. Yes, clinching the number 1 had an effect on me today. I've done what I came here for, securing the number 1. And I am completely fine with today's result. I am healthy and looking forward to a strong finish in London. So that's a quote from Novak. So, I mean, I don't think he was baited into that. I think he was saying that it did matter to him.
He wasn't baited into that, but there are I'm talking about other situations year round, year after year. In this situation, he made it pretty clear what he came to Vienna to accomplish.
And don't we see this all the time when players achieve monumental goals at any given time? There is often a dip in engagement shortly thereafter.
Well, that's the thinking why this whole post-US Open time of year is strange, because a great many players have played all 4 majors. Some have won them, some have semis, and it's been a long, long haul. I mean, it's right. And so, yeah, sure, there absolutely are dips.
But back to the point about Rafa committing to these tournaments because he wanted the number 2 seed at the Australian Open. And Joel, your point about you're going to have to probably get through Novak one way or the other. Do you care if you play him in the semifinals or the finals? From a point of strategy, I want to play him in the finals, because whoever he has to play in the semifinals, especially if it's team, could rough him up, which I think is what we saw in the French Open this year. So from a very fine strategical point, in a sport where every slightest edge matters, I think all things on balance, yeah, let me see if I can play a few of these year-end tournaments, secure this, and make it real easy to get the number 2 seed.
Well, also your point about the being worn down by a semi, it's kind of funny. It's like the player is artist warrior, the player as pragmatist warrior. So in other words, Nadal would never admit that to you. You would not, if you ask Nadal, do you like the idea of your opponent being, playing a 5-set, 5-hour semi and being worn down before your final? He would never admit that. Oh yeah,
well, there's no need to admit it. I mean, it goes without saying.
Yeah, but it gets to the way of how this is the challenge of trying to understand these folks in a way. It's so complicated. You're right. So that's a great point. It's like, yeah, sure. I sure would like it if he had a tough semi, but in a way he would never admit that, because he would say, I'm just here to play him anyway. I don't care whatever he is. I don't care if he got a default. I don't care if he's fresh as a daisy. I'm here to play him no matter what. In fact, I want him to be as fresh as a daisy so I can beat him on genuine terms and all that stuff. It's like for years with the US Open when they played the Saturday semis and the Sunday one, and they're thinking, well, who's got the later semi, and is that going to make them more tired than the guy who had the earlier semi, and all this kind of stuff. So whatever. Yeah, it's intriguing. That's intriguing. And again, it's kind of, I suppose so. Yeah. And also just to be as high as possible.
We might be missing something else here. One of the great motivators in the universe is doubt and doing things that people don't think you can do, doing things that people think are hard to do. And Nadal hasn't won this tournament before. Nadal is
Paris you're referring to.
Yeah, Paris-Bercy. Indoor hard court. A lot of people say he can't get it done on that surface. Obviously, the results are far worse on that surface than any other conditions for Rafa. Not to mention the fact that there is another race going on between Nadal and Djokovic, and that is the total numbers of Masters 1000 events. And I believe it's 37-36, and Nadal trails by 1. So they're also dueling in that race. It's one of the, if you look at all the records, that is one of the most contentious and tightest records that these two are battling for outside of the majors. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of reason. If Nadal wins Paris here, there's a lot he can say that'll make him feel good about it.
Yeah, I get that. And I think also Nadal, he's usually come to this fall indoor playing, having played way more matches. So the fall time of year has been harder for him because his body is quite worn down. I don't know how much he's thinking about how many Masters thou he has compared. It's like these guys have won so many titles and so many records and so many numbers, but sometimes I think it's just a matter of like, yeah, I'd like to get that title, whether it's his 37th, and I'd like to get this one too.
Sorry, for those of you listening on the podcast, my cat just walked in front of my computer on YouTube. I apologize.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah, trick or treat.
Yeah, I mean, we saw how meaningful it was for Novak to win Cincinnati for a second time, Western and Southern, because that made it every Masters 1000 twice. So I think and Amy, you talked about how important titles are. Nadal's got a really big trophy case. He's missing the Paris. I mean,
Masters for trophy. Me, for any of our listeners and viewers that play the sport of tennis, you know how hard it is to win a tournament. I don't care if you only need, 3 matches or 2 matches to win the tournament. You have in your mind's eye winning the thing and lifting the trophy. And it's like a journey that you go on. And for me, that is a major accomplishment to win tournaments. And the Masters of tournaments have so much value attached, so much cachet, that I think it's a big deal.
This is going to be a weird one. Paris in the dead of winter with no fans whatsoever, indoors. It's going to be a strange feel for a Masters 1000 tournament, but I am excited. And on one hand, I'm always on my toes at this time of year? Because I'm wondering, is something crazy going to happen here?
Well, no, that's the point. I mean, again, now this year is so different because it's not like people have played all these matches. You know, they're so, but things can happen, and historically they have. Like this tournament has had some unusual winners, for sure.
Yeah. Like
Yeah,
Sonego.
and what I said about shrinking the calendar, it really doesn't apply to this year because of COVID. And
Right.
you know, the numbers are going up again, the cases, so we can all use a little bit of cheer. So I'm actually glad that Novak and Rafa are playing and these year-end tournaments, and I only wish Roger could play.
Yeah. Well, we like cheer. We need cheer. And let's end on some cheer. That'll do it for this episode of 3. We hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment on YouTube, like the video. We are also available on all podcast platforms, and we greatly appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And we will see you next time on the next episode of 3.